Have we heard anything from Supervisor Miles? His attendance?
I haven't heard it.
When you're ready, I want to get it started on time. We have a couple of schedule issues today.
I'm ready.
Yes, so we have a couple of supervisors and maybe others with some schedule things today, so we'd like to call this to order now. The first thing on, I believe, that we need to get done is to approve one remote attendee.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, I would move that the Finance Committee approve remote participation by Brandon Monk for medical reasons.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Brandon, can you hear us?
I can, thank you.
Fantastic. So I'm going to move quickly. I'll recognize Delaney Carlo has joined us here. We had someone drop out from the Finance Committee due to working conflicts. I'd asked them to join these sessions. I think some of them might have only been planning on the usual once-a-month morning meeting. And this, these times can be difficult during budget season. So thank you for joining us. And then Supervisor Liero would like to make a statement before we begin.
If I could have three visitors from the Winchester Public Schools. Some of you may know that I'm subbing for Winchester City Public Schools, and we've got three colleagues. They're all full-time folks who are teachers right now, and they're working on master's degrees in administration. I was hoping if they could just stand up and introduce themselves briefly.
Okay. My name's Doug Harrison. I'm the band director at Hamlin, so you guys will see me in the streets here not too long.
My name is Andrew Devico, and I'm the physical education teacher at Frederick Douglass Elementary School.
And I'm Shane Campbell. I'm a math teacher at John Henry High School.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that. So we'll move straight away, I believe, if you're ready for the first item. Do you want to introduce it, or?
Yeah, if I could just make a little bit of a change, just let you know that our intention tonight was to go through these couple of items, any other discussions, and then get to a budget resolution, due to a couple of things that have changed at the last minute. It may be that we need to wait to finalize this at the next meeting. Next Wednesday, we could be able to do that at a workshop tonight and still do the budget resolution that night, unless the board's comfortable with a few items on here that may have a few questions with them that you still want to move forward with.
I guess we should see how far we get with these. One thing that, don't let me forget, at the end when we talk about future work session dates, I at least want to put it on the table. Next Wednesday is the Commonwealth Transportation Board for our region. They usually meet fair distance away, like in Stanton, and they're meeting here in our county this time. I'd hate to have our work session conflict with them that we had planned, if it could be avoided, but we're all gonna have to look at our calendars and figure that out at the end today. Okay?
Very good. We actually had two outstanding items when we left last time. I'll even put these up. First item was there was a discussion on $320,000. As you know, it was discussed in the reduction of teachers. Dr. Hummer came and spoke and discussed the implications of doing that. So that was one of the two items that was still undecided when we left the last meeting. As of now, the $320,000 is still in the budget.
So the school, to refresh our memory, the school system had requested quite a few positions, not just 16 general education teachers that are listed here, but special other categories as well. And they're all approved, right? All the requests are approved. This is the only one that was,
Well, generally, we approved the total amount in dollars. If indeed this board were to decide to reduce the $320,000, the school could make choose where they would want to reduce those funds, and I would guess it would probably not be from a staffing level.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I've got a couple comments on that.
okay, please.
If I can. And as Dr. Hummer said last week, he did not anticipate them cutting those positions from 16 to 12. He mentioned that they would have, that was a higher priority to fund than some other things in the school budget, and that they would reduce their funding elsewhere to pick up that $320,000. I'd still recommend that budget cut just because it's one of the few things that I was able to find in the budget that looked to be more than what the school system needed. If they feel like they got other ways that they can cut that money, that's of course up to their prerogative.
Okay, thank you. Yes, certainly we've made cuts to other requests, quite a few in some other departments. So I also entertained that, based on your knowledge of the school system, that was something that it didn't match the increase in students necessarily, and that they could do without, but of course they have to make the ultimate decision. So I'll open it up to discussion on that item, whether we feel like we should reduce the school budget. What's the grand total of the operating budget? Do we have that off of the top of our heads? For the schools?
128, I think it's 128, 128.
Of county funds?
Yeah.
The transfer from the county to the schools is $109,015,936. That's what they add.
So this would be 320,000 off that. So less than a third of a million, so we could do the percentage there. It's not a large percentage, but I'm letting my opinion show. How would the board like to handle this?
Cheryl, when you made the comment about 109, when I saw these other numbers, I thought approximately the county budget was like 128 or 127, 128. The schools like 127. So if you're saying 109, where's my 127 come from? What's that differential?
Could be debt service, the 18 million, or
He had 128 from other revenue sources, which is state and federal. Is that what you're talking about?
I just remember the figure of 128.
And the 128 is the other revenue source, which is state and federal.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And the 109, that includes the transfer out of our capital budget to them? Or is that in addition to the 109?
Hold on, that would include a transfer of $1,051,174 from the capital budget that was earmarked for buses.
So that's in the 109 for what it's worth?
No, that's in addition to the 109. That's in their total, but it's not in the 109.
Okay. So this out of 110 million or 109 million is less than a third of a percent. Just putting it in scope, that's all. So any comments from supervisors before we, on your position on this reduction? Anyone?
I'm not big on it. I mean, I'll just not say that. They started off with an FT request of 42, and cut it down to 25 in the presentation they gave us. And one comment I've heard from several constituents and schools I've visited was the teachers need help. So, I'm not there. that's what happens.
Thank you. Any other comments before we? So we would need a vote on this today or just a consensus?
Consensus.
Okay. That finally would have to be done at a board meeting. to be-
Well, the final budget would be voted on in the board meeting, but the adjustments could be done by consensus at the workshop today.
Okay, any other comments
Yeah.
before we look for consensus? Supervisor Dunn.
A couple weeks ago, we had an advertised budget. Public came and spoke to it. The public comes back next week to deal with this. They're working off that advertised budget. I'm not keen on making consensus adjustments. I think that at this point in time, after we had our public hearing, had an advertised budget, that if you're gonna make that type of motion, you just make it as an amendment to the whole budget process when we go through next week. So, I'm not keen on the process. I would say that if you wanna make amendments to this, make it an amendment to budget, next week, get a vote on it, lay a case for it, we can talk about it, but as I eliminated here, I don't think there are very many citizens who are gonna know the difference between what they saw on the advertised budget and adjustments here. It's all being facetious. And if I said I would take about $30 million off, most people aren't gonna see that. We have to compare the two. I just think that we got a good discussion, but I think that those votes will occur, next week with the amendment process.
Well, we made other adjustments since the advertisement, right, in different departments.
I believe we have made some, it's in your blue papers, I think highlighted in yellow.
I appreciate the comment, Supervisor Dunn, on the appropriateness of when we consider it, but I thought the idea was to make all the adjustments. They could always, on the flip side, someone could amend or restore what we actually consider at the final vote. I'd like to see at least what the consensus is on this matter if we have one, and if we don't, then that would push it off to the future.
I'll make one comment. The school board, not us, the school board came up with a budget. A question to the school board, and that's budget is an increase over last year. Have you done your thorough due diligence on looking at that? I can identify a couple $1 million on areas that I think could be cut, that's my personal opinion, which I stated before. But the school board, my question to the school board rhetorically would be, have you gone through and taken a look at the administration? I've heard multiple people say that the administration is top heavy, so I've looked at that. Have you gone and taken a look at each of the schools, the high schools, the middle schools, to see if they have the same number of counselors, the same number of vice principals, the same number of principals, et cetera? Have you done your due diligence on that? If you have, then the budget you have, which is greater than last year's budget, is what it is. If you have not, then you can go and, reconsider, but you have the capability of adjusting that school board budget much more than we. Mr. Lero has a dollar amount, but he cannot execute that dollar amount on specifics, but you, the school board, can. So I would just encourage you and the school board to go and do your due diligence and see what the numbers are. Thank you.
So Supervisor Dunn, do you have a recommended reduction figure for any of those things?
As I said before, when Dr. Hunter was here, from my perspective, I don't think that money that goes to everybody for school lunches, for those that are the poorest of the poor, sure. But we're putting out more than $1 million or so for that. I just think that's inappropriate. For pre-K, this board had a vote 5-4, 5 or 6 years ago. The first 2 years were federal grants. Now now we're picking up. I know there are people that say, pre-K is wonderful. When we take a look at states, Oklahoma, Georgia, you take a look at the difference in 12th grade between those that had pre-K and not, there's no difference. So my question to you is, why do you put money into a program that shows no difference further out? MIT had a study and it said it showed behavioral issues, but not cognitive, differences. So I'm not going to put out a dollar amount, but if I run the school board, those are areas that I would look at, just because I think that taxpayer money can be better used.
So you're not proposing any particular reduction. So for example, the $1 million or $2 million for pre-K, to reduce it without having concurrence from the school system means they could take a reduction but they might not end that program, they might take it from somewhere else.
We had this issue before where we made some adjustments, we made recommendations and adjustments instead of taking out salaries. I mean, for those of you who know this board, when Mrs. Slaughter has, we made some specific reductions and suggestions, and instead the school board did money elsewhere. So the school board, we can cut the budget, we don't have to say that's the school board's issue. So I'm not prepared to look down that trail with a suggestion, and then they do something different that I would not be in favor.
Any other comments? So I'll go around the room for a consensus about whether we want to accept his proposed $320,000 reduction. Supervisor Lockridge?
I'll ask a question first.
Sure.
We were reading when we were cutting before on state funding, and I believe anything that was left over, Dr. Hummer talked about taking that extra money and going to capital projects, going down their list. So if we cut this 320, would that just mean that money they received from the state, that wouldn't go into capital projects like described? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, they did indicate that they might choose to take it out of somewhere else. But there was breaking news today, I guess, maybe others, Mr. Monaco, maybe you have an opinion, that the state did not conclude its budget today. They've sort of thrown it out. They're gonna start again on May 13th. So I would presume that means that one item, the fact that they settled on a number between the House and Senate amounts, is also off the table if the whole budget is in question. Anyone understand differently? So we may, as happens often, Mr. Ballheffer has alerted me and others, that sometimes we get the state numbers after we have to have our budget in place, unfortunately. Now, we do have the ability to amend a budget, I believe, after the fact, right? If there was a big shortfall, we could find funds elsewhere and appropriate beyond what we approve in April or May.
Yes.
So we'll have to roll with that and find out what the state ends up deciding and make our best judgment now. For my part, I hadn't gone any further than that number that we were given in that regard, which was between the House and Senate numbers for teachers. I'm still presuming that's the case until they change.
Okay. As far as, do I believe the budget can be cut that much, I'm in favor of cutting.
Okay, Supervisor Dunn?
Pass on the pass.
Supervisor Liero?
I'm in favor of
Supervisor Wells walks in at the most difficult moment. I'll come back to you, ask sir if we need another vote for consensus and we'll revisit.
No.
No? Vice Chair? Yes. And the chair votes yes, so we have a consensus of 4.
Consensus to cut this from the schools of 320.
So Supervisor Wells, we went through item 1. Just letting you know, Brandon Monk is participating remotely, and we had an announcement or two, and then we moved into item 1, and we decided to make that cut to join those in yellow shown on the sheet from other departments that we cut along the way. Do you wish to weigh in, or should we move on to item 2? We were asking for a consensus and approval of this cut, and it was 4-1 and an abstention.
Go ahead and move on since I wasn't here. I
Very
apologize
good.
for being late.
No problem, so 4-1 and 2 abstentions at this point. So item 2, restructuring of the Office of the Commissioner of Revenue. Would you like to introduce that before we
Yes,
engage?
we discussed this issue last week, obviously, we did not come to a consensus on it. I distributed to you, or I should say, Tanya distributed you some updated numbers. It has her logo on the top, and there's been some adjustments. And I will tell you, this has been a real challenge getting these numbers out of our system. We actually had Scott, our IT director, went in the back doorway into our system to take the data out to get the individual budgeted salaries. So what you have on here in the left column is the salaries budgeted per position. In the next column over what you have is the recommended salary based on what is being requested by the Commissioner of Revenue. And the sheet out to the right will be then the adjustment, which came to a total adjustment, if you were to make this change to the budget, of $25,350, and the benefits would be approximately $8,873, so the total adjustment would be $34,223, and that's an adjustment of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 positions.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Mr. Chairman, looking at this and the information that we received at our last meeting, it appeared that what the goal was to reclassify certain positions based on various assumptions with duties and such. Is that a fair assessment of how this
Correct.
came to us? So going back in the future budgets and such, this type of thing would normally go to our HR committee. And our HR committee would make an evaluation as to whether these evaluations are appropriate, the classes and such. And so my recommendation on this would be to send this request to our HR committee, have them evaluate these positions and really look and see if these positions need to be reevaluated based on duty and come back with a recommendation. I don't know that this is really something appropriate for a budget discussion. I think it should go through committee, and we typically have not done this in the past, to my knowledge.
And that can be done outside the budget process, so any adjustments, the dollar amounts are not significant enough where the board would decide to make a change outside the budget process, there would be funds and contingencies set, so.
Thank you for that suggestion.
Mr. Chair, I would second that. I absolutely second that. I think that from where I come from, I mean, you do have, HR is the one who does the assessments, and it's a great idea.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Supervisor Bell?
First, I want to go back on numbers. The sheet that we were given here today had 22,000, you said 25, and so you should have more updated numbers in the sheet that I was given a few minutes ago. Okay, thank you. And then I would concur with the previous two speakers to have it go through HR committee, let them do their due diligence, come back here, look at what's being proposed, and then go forward.
And we have a meeting coming up, I think, a week from Friday. We can put that on the agenda for a week from Friday.
Perfect, thank you. Any other comments on this idea? I think myself, it's good to let the HR department do what they do, and that is judge the work and the reclassification for what it is, rather than the budget committee trying to make that assessment. Anyone else want to weigh in before I go around for consensus? So the proposal is to bring this request to the HR committee, and I'll start the other way around. Vice Chair. Supervisor Jewell. Supervisor Wells. Supervisor Leer.
Aye.
We have a consensus, but I'll continue if you'd like. Supervisor Dunn, Supervisor Lockridge, and I agree. So that's what we'll do with this. Thank you, Commissioner. Item 3, then, is a budget resolution.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I may please, comment made by the county administrator with regards to our personnel system and needing backdoor approaches to get data. I don't want anybody in Frederick County to think that our data system is backdoor in order to accomplish something. That comment was totally inappropriate. So that's,
Thank you. So for budget resolution, do we want to just,
I I
So
think
if we
we're,
move something to HR, we have time to wait on that, or?
I think if we can do this outside of HR, because as I stated, it'd be fund sufficient to get that done, where it wouldn't have to hold up the budget, it's not a significant amount of funding. So I think we've got most everything resolved for the operating budget. This would still open up to do the capital budget subsequent to the operating budget. And if you notice, and I'll show you real quick. Oops. Okay. So where's my folders at down here?
Picture of those two birds says it all, doesn't it?
You hook me back up to Schedule D, I think it's in a folder.
Like they won't be archived. Push specs out of there. They're all.
Oh,
The first one.
thank you, your eyes are better than mine, where your glasses were.
Glasses.
Yes, one, the capital can be done, will be done subsequent to the operating budget. And one of the other questions brought up last week was the concern over the outside agencies. We took that number out of there, so if you were to approve the operating budget, it would have the full amount for the outside agencies. However, as we've done in previous years, we can make those changes subsequent to the budget. Those funds could either be moved into contingency or into transportation fund. But I know Supervisor Jewell, that was one of your concerns, so that money is in there in the full amount.
So you're saying if we want to adjust outside agencies later, we can, but it wasn't a hard deadline to finish the operating budget decisions today. So I guess my question is the flip side of that. If we do finish it today, does that lock us in some regard where we cannot make some changes?
Well, actually, today would be if you come to a consensus to move forward, to put that item on the agenda for the next meeting next week. So that's when you, because you'd actually have to vote on the operating budget. The only advantage of doing it at that point in time is it makes it easier on the schools when it comes to funding. If the board doesn't want us to do this, we've had other mechanisms where it's not necessarily that it has to be done either next week.
So if we move forward with what we've got in front of us and we vote on it and pass it next week, what is fixed that we couldn't change? Not that there's much in debate right now, but.
Actually, anything can be fixed, whether through a subsequent appropriation. However, what would need to be fixed is we would still have a meeting to discuss the outside agencies to determine those levels. In the past, we brought those in. And then second, we have an outstanding meeting that we're still in a closed meeting to discuss the constitutional officer salaries, and that could be adjusted at a subsequent date. So those are two outstanding meetings, and obviously then to go into the capital discussions, primarily the capital improvement plan for the schools, and I believe we're gonna have a series of meetings on those.
Thank you very much. So just trying to clarify the process for myself as well as for everyone else here. So how would the board like to handle the operational budget resolution?
So are we talking about the budget resolution now?
We are.
Yes.
Okay, so, we pay outside agencies in August. That's our first check. So you have a timeline there, to make those decisions. We chatted a couple minutes ago, about the difference between what was advertised and the resolution as we have it written right now. And the difference is the 400,000 in additional revenue that we talked about last week. That would be in there. And then we would make the change of the 320,000 to the schools that we just had a consensus on. Those would be the two changes that I will go in and make tomorrow. Because the general fund budget really, like you have the possible transfer to transportation, so the ins and outs didn't really change the total other than the 400,000 in revenue. Is that gonna answer your question?
I think so, except the items in yellow on the sheet were things that we made as we went along. Are all those in the advertisement?
So the total didn't change. That bottom number of possible transfer to contingency is the one that kept on changing. Our total didn't.
So these items in yellow weren't advertised.
The items in yellow, the cuts,
think they were all cuts, maybe not all.
It just increases the amount.
It increases your contingency, those cuts do.
But they didn't show up as line items in the advertisements, so
The ad was done by fund, so we didn't have line items.
Thank you. And Cheryl,
Yes.
on outside agencies, the requested amount is built into the budget, correct?
That's correct.
So therefore,
So any cuts that you would make at a later date would increase your contingency,
okay, that's
or
right.
increase your transfer, or if you had another funding.
Thank you.
sure.
Mrs. Schiffer, we could also take this reduction and offset our capital costs that our capital fund, put that money back to the capital.
We haven't talked about it,
But that is a possibility.
That's an option that we're gonna have to know though when we do that resolution.
Understand.
It's a lot easier to have it in front of you than to be standing at the podium trying to figure out
Yes.
what the number is.
Indeed, just, I wanted to ask if that was a possibility.
So if we want to go forward with the resolution, we need to decide that now.
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you for bringing up the capital funds, because I want to make sure it's clear, first off, talked about the tax, last week we voted on setting the tax, and I voted no, and I voted no because in my world with budgets, you prepare your budget before you talk about your, what you're going to get. I'm just opposite of this whole thing. I'm trying to just pay attention, but in all this discussion about cuts, you gotta keep in mind that all we're doing is we're robbing from Peter to pay Paul. We're taking $5.7 million out of our capital for operating. And I just wanna make sure that's clear. We're not cutting anything. The budget's been raised. What we're doing is we're trying to adjust the budget, but we're not gonna be cutting anything.
So we're removing items from the requests. So we're cutting the increase, if you will.
We're adjusting the request is what we're doing. My point is, this budget is not going down. This budget is going up from what it was last year. And we're removing $5.7 million from the capital fund over to operating. And this is something that's gonna have to be addressed. We're gonna have to come up with, how are we doing, what are we doing with the revenue coming in? Why are we not adjusting? Because in 3 or 4 years, you're not gonna have this. And we're working with money that's specific for capital needs. And we're moving it over to operating. So I'm very concerned about this whole process. And I just point that out, and it really, it's bothered me, but I'm just been sitting here trying to take this in. I am new to this process. This one, I think that next year, let's get the budget done before we limit ourselves on what we're doing with our taxes. Right now, we've got 2 elementary schools that we gotta do something with. One of them because the previous board cut the size of the school instead of keeping it the way it should have been. And we've got a high school. So we've got some serious stuff going on, along with the infrastructure, transportation. I mean, we hear it all the time when we go out. So I wanted to voice that.
Thanks, Chair.
Mr. Chairman, just to give a little history on where we've been and how we are going forward. In fiscal year '22, we had leftover from savings and expenditures and increases in revenue of $19.5 million that got transferred to our capital fund. And again, I'm saying savings and expenditures and increases in revenue, $19.5 million. In '23, we had savings and expenditures and increases in revenue of $15.4 million, which got transferred to our capital fund. So just as a point of reference, that money Frederick County had already collected from our taxpayers. So what we essentially are doing, and we've already collected this money from our taxpayers, and we're using it to pay these expenses today. So I just want to share that information. And also that we have a policy in place that says we have, when we hit a certain threshold of our best management practices, that those resources would be transferred over to our capital fund. So just want to give some historic perspective on that information and the fact that we had already collected those resources from our taxpayer.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that, but at the same time, I'm gonna point this out again. You don't know what you don't know, right? You don't know what's in store in the future for us. We are the fastest growing county in this state with one of the lowest tax rates. And sooner or later, it's gonna come back to bite us, and we've got some large expenditures coming our way, we are going to have to make. So that's great that we've got $60 million coming into our capital funds, that's $60 million that we should be applying for a new high school. And that's my point, we've gotta stop, and we need to adjust, and we should be doing, if we are going to do this the right way, then money should be put into the operating account at the beginning, not at the capital fund. But I mean, I'm sorry, I just don't, I don't understand that, and I'm thrilled that Frederick County's had money coming in. But we've also got some very large expenditures that are going coming out.
Supervisor Joe, I appreciate that opinion, but it's also a fact that if we have capital projects we need to undertake or other things that we need to do, we should look at spending cuts before we look at raising taxes on taxpayers. I think the first job of this board, in my opinion, is to try and provide the services the public wants in the most efficient way possible, and you always look at making that more efficient before you go into the tax phase. The reason we vote on the tax rates when we do is because some of that is required. There are deadlines from the state. The only way to get ahead of that would be to start our budget process earlier in the year. And then we'd be ready with some of the decisions we need. We'd have to ask the departments in the schools, for example, to come to us earlier in the year. That's something we should take up the summer. I propose we have a discussion on our budget process. I've wanted it to be earlier. One restraint is we might have board changes every so often in Novembers after elections, so it's hard to start before that date. If you start before January 1, but after November election day, you can invite the new members to attend so they're aware, but they can't vote yet, and they wouldn't be paid the stipend they get, but they could at least be engaged. I'd be in favor. One of my thoughts would be to start the process a little bit earlier, but we'll have to consult with various departments and see if they're ready to give us information earlier than they have been in the past. So that would get us ahead. And then we've looked a lot in the last couple months on items that we thought we could save in spending efficiencies. We haven't looked as much at revenues, and I don't mean taxes. That's one piece, but the other piece of it is projecting ahead. What is the average revenue growth that we get from year to year? I realize it fluctuates. And what are our anticipated growths in spending just to meet inflation, cost of living for employees, other things we've committed to, like 8 firefighters per year. You put all those things graphically and you determine how much more revenue do we have coming in. Then we know where the savings or the taxes need, so information gets revealed to us bit by bit, and I think maybe starting earlier would be a help. Maybe doing some work in this off-budget season as well would be good. And that's what I'll propose when we meet in May or June after the budget season's finished. Any other comments, Supervisor Doug?
I concur on having this budget process much earlier, September, even if you have an election in November. We want to run for an election, okay? If you're running for a position, you're laying out policy, you're going to write, saying I'm for A or against B or whatever. So if you're running for office, you're taking policy positions to get the voters to do that. So I think that, starting in September is fine. And if you get elected in November and you win, you should be aware of what's going on. And so you can walk in and listen. You could be a member elect. You don't have a vote. At least you'd be in a position where on January 2nd, you just take that transition into, yeah, I was a member elect, now I vote. So I think just starting the process earlier is helpful, that's one comment. I don't want to get necessarily sidetracked off your budget resolution, but we're going to talk about capital costs. I want to take like 5 minutes and talk with you, not at you. So you want to take 5 minutes to talk about capital, you're trying to finish this first, because I do have to leave on 6:05.
Yeah, I still like to finish this if we can.
Okay, go ahead.
And then we'll come back and
Okay.
we'll discuss future meetings, and capital will be part of that.
Okay, go ahead.
I appreciate that, and I have a subject maybe to throw in later if people are interested. In a school tour, I talked to Superintendent Hummer. The school system is thinking of getting legislative priorities, having a session on that. They might not have done that before, and discuss getting their act together like we need to do as well. I didn't mean that negatively, it wasn't the right words, but getting ready for approaching Richmond on their priorities that would help them. And that's something we talked about as well. So he and I tentatively said we should certainly consult with each other, and hopefully our priorities would be similar, and we could be supporting, or even he wanted to invite our delegates and senator at the minimum up to discuss it sometime in the late summer, very early fall. We might want to consider coordinating with that process ourselves, but that's enough for now. As we said, we want to get on and finish the immediate agenda. So budget resolution, do we want a consensus on all the numbers we have so far? Cheryl, what would you need from us?
So right now, I have what we advertised, plus $400,000 in additional revenue for the general fund, and a reduction of $320,000 to the school fund. So that would put that transportation at 1.35. Or I'll push that in a contingency, but it doesn't change the total general fund. And then we can entertain, Judy had something about the capital, like, that's really the cost of your school buses that is that where you're going?
Yes.
Okay.
So Vice Chair, do you propose that if we follow that path, that the number be shown as returned to the capital fund rather than contingency?
Is that the easiest way, Cheryl, to do it, or would you transfer it? How would you suggest that we do it best?
So what I would do is I would reduce the transfer from the capital fund to the school operating by the one, whatever that number was, $1,051,174. So instead of that being funded from the capital fund, it would be a transfer for the general fund. Is that what you're talking about?
Sounds like that would be the easiest way to do that, and it wouldn't specifically take it from the capital fund, it would be taking it from the operating fund.
That's correct.
Thank you. That would be my suggestion.
Okay, so we should go around, I guess, treat it as a motion with an amendment, so we'll deal with the amendment first. Assuming we want to go forward with approving the operational budget, who agrees with characterizing it as coming from, that amount coming from the operational fund and less by that much coming out of the capital fund? I believe is what
I would agree with that.
Supervisor Jewell?
Yeah.
Supervisor Wells?
Is this consensus vote, or are we taking votes?
Consensus.
Okay, no.
Supervisor Leon?
Yes.
Supervisor Dunn?
Would have passed.
Supervisor Lockridge?
Yes.
Chair votes yes, so we have a narrow consensus there.
Okay, so I'm taking the amount that I'm taking the amount that I was gonna transfer from the capital for the buses, and then now it's coming from the general fund. Is that correct? Okay. So that kind of finishes what I need from the resolution, and it won't just be the operating fund, it'll be for all the funds. I just wanna make sure that we understand that. We do the school operating, the school capital, the airport capital, the landfill, so, it'll include all the funds.
Okay.
The resolution, though.
Yes, and the resolution will not include the tax rates because we did that already.
Very
Okay.
good. Any questions or discussion before we seek consensus on going ahead with the budget resolution? and we're just, again, bringing it to ourselves at the board meeting, so.
That's correct.
But we're setting the format for it.
That's correct. And then we will talk about the outside agencies at a later date, which will be determined. And then,
And we have a
whatever else
closed
like that
session
is other.
on constitutional officers. And I guess if we come up with something else, there is still room to discuss it and apply it.
Yes.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair?
In regard to outside agencies, Mrs. Strickler, in the past, we have had certain groups come in and speak to us. So how would you propose to do that? Would you call them all in, or would you ask for us to give you specifics? Would that be the best? It seems to me we've done that in the past.
I think if you want to listen to what someone's request for funding is, it would be easier to do it that way. I think that we had a couple that showed up at the public hearing. And, Laurel Center, Seniors First, showed up at the public hearing. So if there's anyone in particular.
And on the MOU side, we could get updates on the MOUs and such as far as what the county's obligation would be, or was that defined in the numbers that were presented to us with the formula as to how we?
I'd have to revisit that.
Okay, that would be helpful, I think, when we do that.
So in past years, we had more outside agencies come and actually present to us than I recall coming to us this year. Do we normally extend that to them, or would it only be by request if we want more information?
We've done it both ways. We had, hours of everyone coming for a request, and we've had sometimes no one comes forward, and then other times it's just whoever we choose.
Thank you.